Welcome to SAM Conversation, a program of South Asia Monitor. We are going to discuss the deteriorating situation between Afghanistan and Pakistan, even as Afghanistan Taliban warms up to India. To discuss this, we have Ms. Aparna Rawal, a researcher and specialist in this subject. Aparna, welcome to South Asia Monitor.
Thank you for having me, sir.
Tehreek-e-Taliban Pakistan was established in 2007 as a coalition of various Sunni Islamist groups and of Pakistan, and it launched a lot of attacks on Pakistani forces, and even civilians, killed some leaders, and carried on this way till the second takeover of the Taliban in Afghanistan in 2021. Thereafter, the equation changed, that the relations between Pakistan and the Afghani Taliban, unlike earlier, they deteriorated and became quite violent. 2024 has been a particularly violent year, with the Tehreek-e-Taliban Pakistan becoming more and more effective, and even being joined by the Balochistan groups, the activist groups in Balochistan, anti-Pakistan. Ms. Rawal, I request you to bring us an update of what has happened since late, very briefly, what has happened in 24, and then come down to 25, which again has been quite eventful, even this very month.
Yes. For starters, so Taliban was a creation of Pakistan. We all know that. So since Taliban came to power in 2021, Pakistan was hoping for a strategic depth in Afghanistan. And they were hoping that in this way, they could curb groups like TTP, Tehreek-e-Taliban Pakistan, and also the Baloch Pashtun militant groups, which were also working in hand with TTP. Because TTP wants a Sharia law, but at the same time, these so-called groups like TTP, then there are other groups like Gul Bahadur Group and all. These are like the splinter groups that have similar ideologies as Taliban. And now most of them are actually looking Taliban with great admiration, because this was an insurgent group. I wouldn't call it terrorist, because in some countries it's not designated as a terrorist group. And Taliban started from like an insurgent group, a militant group, and has now transformed into like a de facto government. So most of these splinter groups look at Taliban as a sort of a role model to carry this forward. And they also have pledged their allegiance to Taliban. Taliban has close connections with Al-Qaeda. Hence, most of these small splinter groups have now connections with Al-Qaeda and bigger groups like Haqqani and all, because Haqqani and Taliban together have formed the interim government in Afghanistan. So since 2024, a lot of things have now emerged. A lot of new things are emerging, but we can't say that history is not repeating itself. History is again repeating itself. For starters, whoever Pakistan aligns with, if it is not their way or the highway, it's always been the case. And most of these groups have always been doomed after Pakistan decides to cut loose and run if it doesn't get what it wants. For example, when Taliban came into creation, it was created by the Pakistani ISI with heavy funding. Some funding came from the Saudi, some came from the Al Qaeda groups. It trained a bunch of warriors or fighters in Pakistan during the Soviet era, the Soviet Afghan War. More than 250,000 fighters were created, and they were sent across the border to fight. Some of them were mercenaries from foreign lands. They didn't have to be just Pakistan or Afghan refugees who had come back to Pakistan. These were people who were coming from different Islamic countries who were ready to fight in the name of jihad. They were created, Taliban movement took place, they moved forward. 96, they came to power. That time, they were not able to reach their goals. There was a fall. The Karzai government came out into power. But the fact of the matter is, one thing with every organization or a government that has ruled in Afghanistan or that has been in power, the one thing that they could never settle with Pakistan was over the Durand line. The Durand line was one thing that none of the governments, regardless of who it was, whether it was nourished by Pakistan or other different superpowers, it didn't matter. Because at the end of the day, the Afghans view the Khyber Pakhtunkhwa as like one big part of the Pashtun land, Pashtunistan as they call it. And even Taliban has openly, most of the time, said that you cannot separate the families, and the Durand line is nothing but an artificial entity. However, Pakistan inherited the Durand line after its independence. It has stuck to its stance saying that no, this is through international law, hence you must respect the Durand line. While nobody from the Afghan side, regardless of which government was in power, has ever supported that, believing that the Pashtuns were divided. And with this, what happened was there was a fallout. Even though Pakistan thought it would play the Taliban as a puppet to, get its gains, have a strategic depth, and control the TTP. This has failed very miserably because TTP decided that it was not going to go ahead with the ceasefire which it had declared in 2021. By December 2021, everything went downhill. There was a surge of attacks. It has continued. There's a massive uptick. Now, not only has TTP joined hands with the splinter groups that have pledged allegiance to the Taliban, but also with the new Pashtun and Baloch militant groups that are coming into picture. Most of them have now joined hands. There have been coordinated attacks between the groups. And in order to do so, the Taliban also has not commented much on it. Taliban has reluctantly, I wouldn't say reluctantly, I would say that they haven't really said much about curbing these groups. Pakistan was hoping that Taliban would intervene and curb the groups. They haven't done that. Not to mention, with the Durand Line skirmishes going on, Pakistan has been saying that the Afghanistan government has been providing safe havens and shelters for a lot of anti-Pak elements. It could be TTP or a few other groups. The leaders and the core commanders have safe havens over there. In the meantime, what has happened is TTP former core commander, Ehsan Ullah Ehsan, has suddenly become very vocal. There were reports that were coming out on social media where this man decides to come out and expose the ISI, Pakistani ISI. He even made a statement saying that the Pakistani ISI, in order to curb TTP, has decided to join hands with the ISIS Khorasan. And this ISIS Khorasan is now working under this Dabori agreement, while their major core commanders, leaders, are now given like safe havens in Pakistan in government guest houses. So Ehsan Ullah, what he did was he exposed a bunch of names which were pertaining to the ISKP cadre. Now what has happened, TTP is also making a claim that under the military fire, ISI hopes to push the ISIS cadre right through the border into Afghanistan. So that way, KP can go emerge into Afghanistan and carry out what Pakistan could not do. Plus, it gives Pakistan a reason for deniability. If a terror group takes the fall, it gives Pakistan a reason for deniability. ISIS Khorasan is actually a rival group of Taliban. Both the two groups
Could
have.
you, if pardon me, you
Yeah,
just mentioned about ISIS Khorasan.
yes.
Could you elaborate on its full form and just um, mention exactly how this came about, this connection?
Yes. The thing with ISIS Khorasan in the area, it's basically now considered as an offshoot, with the parent group being the ISIS, the main ISIS central, which is called Daesh. Initially, when it emerged in Afghanistan, they were a bunch of small groups. Some of them were lone wolves in a way. They were carrying out their operations. They would go install themselves in the tribal area. Now, in Afghanistan, a lot of warlords and feudal lords still exist, tribes, so on. So, what this cadre started doing was planting itself in the tribal matters, taking side, trying to resolve feuds, changing perceptions, because the idea was to have a monopoly on jihad in Afghanistan, using Afghanistan as a launching board. However, what happened was what they didn't anticipate was Taliban coming to power. Taliban came to power. Not only did it come to power, it had access to like technology and weapons which the US had left behind. So now they had this. Plus, Taliban started out a witch hunt for anybody who was a part of the Ghani government. A lot of the intelligence officers, soldiers, even the other people who were sympathizers, the officials, or anybody who was a sympathizer of the Ghani government was hunted down and killed. So most of these people from this faction started joining ISKP, the ISIS Khorasan. And the other thing that happened was when Taliban came to power, a lot of its fighters were ordered to go back home to their land of origin, their homeland. So some of them didn't have jobs. There was increase in unemployment. So most of the Taliban fighters also were seen joining ISKP because now Taliban had left the war theater and now was trying to behave like a government. So with this, what happened was ISKP started gaining traction. Now, one way of curbing another group was to support the ISKP. So what TTP, former commander, what he said was ISI, Pakistani intelligence, is known to carry this kind of a strategy. We have seen this in Kashmir also. Under the fire of the military infiltration, border infiltrations, what they do is they push their cadre across the border. And this is something that the TTP core commander spells out, even in his articles, and he tells people that this is exactly what Pakistan is trying to do with Afghanistan. And this is how, once they push the ISKP cadre into Afghanistan, it carries out the attacks or assassinations. And this has happened in the past too. Pakistan has used other groups to do this. But here, since we are just speculating on the current times, we are going to talk about just what is happening. So this is what the core commander from the TTP said. However, ISI has denied that. Also, the people who had good relations with the Taliban, for example, the previous Imran Khan regime, these people were very pro Taliban. Even their ISI spy chief, Faiz Hamid, was seen, sorting out some kind of a dispute between the Taliban leaders and the Haqqani leaders when they were trying to form a government. He was seen in Afghanistan literally in September as soon as Taliban came to power. Faiz Hamid right now is being arrested. He has been court-martialed for, trying to support Imran Khan, even trying to create some kind of protest. The main protest that happened after the arrest of Imran Khan, they believe Faiz Hamid had something to do with. So that way, this was Asim Munir's, the current general, the COAS's plan to get rid of these people. Yes.
So, please also throw some light on the participation of the Balochistan Liberation Army and other
Yeah.
Balochi groups who are now siding with the Tehreek-e-Taliban Pakistan against, they were already against the Pakistani state because
Yeah.
they they were I think the Pakistani Pakistan army particularly had been very exploitive towards them.
So what has happened? So as we know, the Baloch have always asked for self-determination. Heavy crackdowns have been happening in Balochistan since forever. A lot of Baloch insurgents have picked up arms. Not only have they evolved in terms of their fighting, their human intelligence has improved vastly over the past couple of years. Human intelligence, the network, and also the fighting tactics have changed. Initially, it was more of like attack and scamper. Now, these days, we don't see that. They are actually taking on the military full fledged. We've seen this in many, many cases. Not just the Baloch. Baloch are fighting under BRAS, the umbrella network of all the Baloch insurgents, where you see BLA, BLF, so on. But then there is also the Sindhu Desh Revolutionary Army, which is a part of this. So you have people, the Sindhis fighting, you have the Baloch fighting. In Khyber Pakhtunkhwa, the Pashtuns have their strong allegiance towards the other Pashtuns who might be across the border. Because at the end of the day, they don't view the Durand line as a form of a boundary. They look at it as an artificial entity. Then the local civilians think of it this way too. So in one side, this has happened. So what has happened is now there's a network that has formed. Each one of them tag team to get the job done because they all have one single goal, that is anti-Pakistan activities. So they will go ahead and work together to achieve their respective goals. And most of them also feel that they're being exploited. Not to mention the attacks in KP from like these group has really risen quite a bit. KP and some areas, around the border. So Pakistan decided that it would start initiating this operation on the request of the Chinese because the Chinese investments, which were more towards the western side of the border, were coming under heavy attacks. Because, of course, like the people who think that they are being colonized by Pakistan and might be subjugated by them and replaced as a demographic by the Chinese, they are worried. So the attacks have been increasing on CPEC projects, and it has been a big disaster for the Chinese too. So the Chinese have had ordered Pakistan to help out, and they had lost interest in how much security was being provided. So now, with the Chinese in play, the militants have increased their attacks even more frequently. They become more confident. We were not even seeing earlier the females
There have
participate.
been some Chinese casualties.
Yes, there have been massive Chinese casualties. The
There have
idea,
been some serious Chinese casualties.
yes, over the years, it has just been expanding. Now, even their investments were being attacked. And not only that, the insurgents have become so much more confident because, yes, now over the years, they have reached a certain amount of technicality in their attacks, also strategy as well. Initially, we were not seeing as many women fedayins, the suicide bombers. Most of these groups, like the Majid Brigade of the Baloch Liberation Army, started employing females. Female Fedayeen attacks were taking place where they would lead the way, they would come across as unsuspecting, and the attacks were carried by this radical arm of BLA, which was the Majid Brigade. And they have claimed a lot of attacks, not only on the Pakistan military installments, but also the Chinese projects. So with this, China was worried last year. China ordered Pakistan to do something about it. Pakistan, in order to appease China, decided it'll come up with Operation Azme Ishtakam. However, protests broke out in all these areas in Balochistan, Khyber Pakhtunkhwa, POJK, so on. And the government had no choice but to be a little more lenient. So now what we are expecting in this area is that there will be certain private security sectors which will be given some kind of a leeway. Pakistan is coming to some terms with giving China certain responsibility in the managing its own security. With all these developments, we can't expect the insurgents to not up their game. There will be upticks, and there will be more insurgencies that will follow because of this, more attacks, more things. But on the other side, Taliban being a country and not being able to do anything to maintain its relations with Pakistan is going to be very difficult for any relation to be built on. Not to mention, on December 31st, reports came out that Pakistani chief of ISI, he actually met up with the president of Tajikistan. And Tajikistan is a very sensitive matter, given it might not be politically or militarily strong as the other nations, but it houses the National Resistance Force of Afghanistan, which is anti-Taliban. That is one. Plus, the president of Tajikistan himself is worried because the Tehrik-e-Tajikistan, Tehrik-e-Taliban in Tajikistan
Tehreek
is
Taliban,
also,
Pakistan.
no, Tajikistan, not Pakistan.
Tajikistan, sorry.
Tajikistan. So these people are looking to overthrow the current government in Tajikistan. So Pakistan being desperate to maintain alliance to bring down Taliban or to show a force of power to curb it into, following what it wants, has met already with the Tajikistan president. And of course, this is not going to serve its purpose of building better relations with Taliban. So this is one issue that is already happening. So there are three factors, if we have to think about it, why the deterioration is happening. One is because the border skirmishes. The Durand Line is honored by Pakistan, but Afghans do not honor it, neither do the Pashtuns. Then secondly, the other issue is now with this person, the ISI chief going and visiting Tajikistan and asking them to build on security agreements, working in military tandem to counter, the Taliban activities, is also not going to fare well. And lastly, also, we have an issue with the refoulement. The Afghan refugees which are being sent back to Afghanistan. That is another issue which is becoming a big matter. A lot of these Afghan refugees, they had come back. Some of them, the families had returned to Pakistan, fled to Pakistan because of the Soviet-Afghan conflict. The Durand Line had become like a regular exchange of Afghan refugees running into Pakistan and the Mujahideens who were trained from Pakistan running across the border to fight. So some families have existed in Pakistan ever since the Soviet era. Their families have continued. But however, some of them might not have citizenships. Some of them have undocumented visas or cards, while some are claiming that it's a heavy crackdown that Pakistan is doing out of security matter. Because Pakistan believes that Taliban might be sending out its own fighters in form of refugees and may cause problems in Pakistan. So they decided that they would like send back everyone. So 23rd November is, no. In November of 2023, this is when the repatriation program started. And they were given 1 month to leave Pakistan. However, that did not happen. This got extended until next year, the 2024. Then Pakistan came up with this idea that we need to do this in phases. So it'll be phase 2. I mean, it got a lot of criticism from the rest of the world, international platforms. But at the end of the day, Pakistan is also economically weak at the moment. It can barely survive, let alone take care of the refugees. So the idea was to send them back on the pretext that this was actually affecting their internal security. And of course, Pakistan said that, and Taliban's reaction to TTP problem of Pakistan was that this is Pakistan's internal problem. We have no reason to get involved. So there have been blame games going on between the two countries. And because of this, the deterioration is getting worse. Yes.
I must thank you for a lot of facts that you've facts developments that you have brought out, and as you know, it's also a fact that while so much has happened between the Tehreek-e-Taliban and Pakistan and the Afghan Taliban and Pakistan, um, the Afghan Taliban have warmed up towards India. Well, that's in India is been correct in accepting that because it makes no sense in alienating yourself to a group which is in charge of the country, which is running the country. But the fact remains that no matter how much of the doldrums that Pakistan may be alleged to be, it is not at all affecting uh, its induction of terrorists into India. That has continued, and we cannot expect that to be, to go down just because there's pressure on Pakistan of Afghanistan. The only way to sort that out is between, is when the Indian government takes greater measures like it has in the past of the surgical strikes or the Balakot strikes, many more of these, or at short intervals will certainly have a very great effect. But otherwise, we have to we have to live with that, and by all means, we can continue to develop our relations with the Afghan Taliban, hoping that the situation in Afghanistan improves for the Afghans.
Yes.
As it used to be.
I think, sir, the India's approach at this moment is a very pragmatic approach. But at the same time, I think India was always very connected with the people of Afghanistan, not so much as Taliban, which is why
Of course, of course.
which is why the humanitarian aid never stopped, regardless of how Taliban came to power. India is also one of the countries that had spoken about how Taliban had not taken a single woman on the cabinet or
Exactly.
small.
That's one of the very major issues. Yes.
However, I would like to add this. Recently, Al Jazeera has been quoting certain analysts saying that India has not taken a stance against, the atrocities being inflicted on the women. But that's not true because India has been speaking up ever since the time Taliban has come to power. And not only has India, if not spoken now, India has shown a lot, displayed a lot through action when it came to providing humanitarian aid, vaccines, so on. Not only that, we have also proposed the
Oh,
development of
yes.
the Chabahar port. So that way we can also provide a trade to even Afghanistan. It will be better for us and for Afghanistan and also for Iran. A symbiotic relation in a way. So what India is doing is a very pragmatic
No.
approach.
In the Indian assistance to Afghanistan
Yeah.
has continued. This that in fact, this is one of the countries which has been at the forefront of
Yes.
assisting even in the earlier phase of after the Taliban was driven out, and even now that continues.
Yes, yes. Because like what Al Jazeera and few other, and I'm going to specify it, Reuters, Al Jazeera. These are the two publications that have been defaming India by saying that we haven't said a word while we're trying to warm up to Taliban. But then
Well,
again,
that
Taliban
that
wasn't
is
our creation. Taliban was Pakistan's creation. I think if anything, you should hold the person responsible
absolutely.
who has
No,
produced it.
you're right in that, but then there are so many. Today, India is in a position where there are number of countries or forces, which are not very happy about its progress and are working very hard to
True.
do us down. Well, be that as it may, uh, thank you, Aparna Rawal, for all your inputs. All the best.